here, Veronica Slater here, who is one of the curators of this exhibition, Hidden in Plain Sight. It's really unfortunate that Litsa couldn't make it. Litsa's got COVID, and we're also sorry to say that one of the other exhibitors who was going to come and talk today, John Smith, also has COVID, so has not been able to attend. Mandy Ujnu is here. Mandy made her film in response to one of John Smith's films, and met him in advance of that to talk about that sort of collaboration. And so, you know, we'll be able to hear about John Smith's films from Mandy. And we're really pleased to have Cherry Smyth here to share the discussion. Cherry's also written something about the works in the pamphlets, which I hope you get a chance to read. After the exhibition, we've got time to have a few drinks. Some of them are cooling in my fridge, which I had to put in a special claim to be able to have as a piece of essential gallery equipment. So give me 10 minutes to set it out after the end of the talk. So we'll have time for a drink and further look at the exhibition. Also like to announce that tonight, hopefully, we have a show opening in the project space, which is a show looking at the kind of processes that will be involved in growing plants on Mars. So taking that idea of sight somewhere much further than perhaps we all imagined we would go this afternoon. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Cherry to introduce the conversation.
Okay, thanks David. Welcome everybody. My name's Cherry Smyth, and I teach poetry in the creative writing department here, and I also write about art, mostly abstract painting. The more abstract the better. I love it because it needs words. And I write for Art Monthly and other publications, and I've been kind of involved with this exhibition for some months, and I've found that the title just goes round in my head, and every day there's a new Hidden in Plain Sight, and I've been thinking, I must talk about that. It's a book, isn't it? Several books. It's just so rich, and I'd love to thank Veronica and Litsa for asking me to be part of this, and just how generative an idea it is. I wanted to bring that creative collective element into today, so I've left you all a little piece of blue paper, and I wanted you to just write on it. You could get one if you didn't get one as well. What it made you think of. What is Hidden in Plain Sight for you? What did you think of when you heard that title? And maybe just, if you can think of just one thing, that would be great. Just write it down, and I'll come back to that in a minute. When I was in Ireland's Wild West Coast, pre-pandemic, to write, I spent a lot of time looking out of the window. Few people passed. Once I saw a young man who was walking along the shore. He looked up, he paused and looked down. He meandered. Ah, I thought, he's thinking, he's contemplating. And I felt a common bond between us. Another soul simply watching for watching's sake, waiting for insight. Then as he moved closer between the lichen-covered rocks, clumps of seaweed, I saw that he was on his phone. All the time he'd been in dialogue. He'd not been alone with the sea and his mind as I'd imagined. He was absorbed or perhaps distracted by a conversation. The kinship vanished. Is distraction the new currency? As poet Ariana Reines puts it in her collection, A Sand Book, quote, I stared devoutly into my phone in the capital. It was a somewhat spiritual serfdom for which we had all volunteered. Who will be honest about the terrible sadness of worlds condemned to the scroll? It's this condemnation to spiritual serfdom that art releases us from. To watch, to wait, to make, to perform, to exhibit, to listen, to watch, to collect together, away from the doom scroll, to gain insight and belonging. And as you all know, we could have all done this on Zoom, and how much nicer it is to be in this room together, to see expressions, to share breath, to share atmosphere. Artist Kader Attier suggests that the more sophisticated we become as societies, the more we hide our injuries. Pre-modern societies repaired objects but kept the repair visible and didn't try to make the object return to its original state. You could think kintsugi, the gold way of mending cracks in pottery, which make the crack a new sign of beauty. He argues that some traumas such as genocide, colonization, slavery, and the Holocaust cannot be repaired. Again, art and writing to me become the visible stitching, the gold seam along the crack, the plaster that points to the wound that hadn't been noticed before. Artist Michael Rakowitz makes art with dispossessed people, war veterans, refugees, and the homeless. In one extraordinary piece called Parasite, he attached plastic shelters to hot air vents coming out of office buildings that the homeless could sleep in. He sees his work as, quote, the idea of a bandage, something that heals a wound while enabling people to see the wounded. We normally try to make homelessness disappear from view. In a recent book of essays, At the Crossroads of Race, called Out of the Sun, writer Essie Edugan argues that, quote, a world of shadows, edges are written histories. It's these shadow narratives suppressed by an exploitative empire and the art that consolidated empire that are increasingly changing and challenging how whiteness is framed. In Back to Black, writer Kehinde Andrews retells black radicalism for the 21st century. He argues that the science and industry central to the power of the West were built on genocide, slavery, and colonialism, the underdevelopment of Africa by design. Africa is poor because the West is rich. The richest continent in mineral wealth is being stripped of its resources to sustain our technological growth, which brings me back to the cobalt in your pocket. In Poem of the Mountain, Russian poet Marina Tsetseva writes, they say it is by the pool of the abyss that you measure a mountain's height. With climate catastrophe and expansionist and ideological wars, we are feeling the pool of the abyss, created in part by our incremental overreaching. Art knows the abyss and gives us ladders out of it. In a letter to the German poet Rilke in 1926, unbelievably almost 100 years ago, Marina Tsetseva wrote, quote, nationality, the shutting out and shutting in. Orpheus bursts nationality or extends its boundaries so far and wide that we are all included in it. And if you remember, Orpheus was this beautiful musician who was enabled to go into the underworld to face death and return through his music, but without his beloved. I just wanted to finally read a little extract from my book Famished, which was about the Irish famine, which was caused the biggest refugee crisis in the 19th century. 1 million people died at least, and 2 million emigrated. And the repercussions of this are still being felt through epigenetics in today's Irish population. It's from a poem called Silence. Because I couldn't place the figure, I started to search. Because I didn't know what a million was, I started to count. Because I couldn't believe the silence, I started to carry stones, seeking somewhere to set them, make a structure, a steadying wall. It was a feeling that something as big as history didn't tally, didn't add up. In the way an integer at the end of a long division tells you you've done it right. There were fractions hanging off this story's edge. The Yupik Eskimo call it Nulanguraluka. Pretend it didn't happen. Pretend the flu didn't take half your people. Put the pretending in a hole and get high, get drunk, not knowing who to call, how to call, what to say, what was lost. The man who survived the Holocaust and didn't speak of it for 35 years said, I tried to convince myself it never happened. Maybe it happened, but I wasn't affected. I walked under the rain without getting wet. When a white waitress refused to serve Audre Lorde and her family ice cream on her first trip to Washington, D.C., no one wanted to mention it. She says, even my two sisters copied my parents' pretense that nothing unusual or anti-American had occurred. We could conquer it by ignoring it. Now, some of you came in late. Could you just quickly write down on that piece of paper what came to mind when you saw the words hidden in plain sight? What did you think has been hidden? Just one or two things that has been hidden in plain sight as far as you know. Did you get one? Does one of them share? Anyone else? Anyone need one? Because they are floating around. They've fallen on the floor. They're Did you get one?
What can we do with that?
Okay, then I want you to swap them yours with someone you don't know. So someone you didn't come with. So swap it with someone you don't know. Turn round and swap it with someone else. So have you written something on your piece of paper? The little piece of paper on the chair beside you? There. So write what you think is hidden in plain sight. Is it one pen? No, you can take
I was laughing because in art school and no one has a pencil.
Yeah. Okay, have you all done that? Have you all swapped yours around with someone else? There's one at your feet. Has everyone done it? It's a little bit like in some church services where you have to shake hands with someone you don't know. It's an old strategy for getting people to communicate.
I find the next row, you have to go further back.
Free exchanges.
Keep swapping so you just don't have your own.
I've got a pen.
It doesn't matter.
Keep swapping.
Have you all done it?
No, me too.
Yeah? Okay. Can we start with you? Can you just read it out loud?
I haven't actually done mine yet because we didn't have a pen.
Just got-
Oh, okay.
We've got one now.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Have you done it? You're thinking about it. Okay, is it Rob?
Roy.
Roy, would you read yours out, whatever you have?
Well, I
there?
haven't swapped it with anybody yet.
Oh,
Because
okay.
mine's a bit heavy and I don't really want to scare anybody.
What do you want to know?
All right, okay, you own yours. What's yours?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's, when I saw it.
No,
was-
one word. One word.
One word?
Yeah. What's the one word, if you can?
One word.
Yes.
It's very limiting, isn't it?
Yeah. Two then, two.
Justice.
Justice, good. Okay, would you like to read yours?
Light.
Landscape.
Landscape.
Thank you.
Trouble. Trouble.
Invisible. Uninvisible.
Uninvisible.
Disappearance.
Disappearance, yeah? You don't have one?
From my partner. Miss.
Miss?
Miss. As in something I miss.
Missed.
Missed.
Okay.
History and attitudes.
History and attitudes. Right?
Vista.
Vista.
History of slavery, institutional racism.
Yes, great.
Dark histories.
Dark histories, lovely. Yeah, that's like the shadow histories, the shadow narratives.
Absorb subconsciously.
Good.
Obvious but hidden.
Mm-hmm.
Levels of insight. Levels of insight.
Levels of insight, yeah.
Mokita.
Mogida?
Yeah, this translates to the elephant in the room.
Ah, the elephant in the room. Oh, lovely.
Ah, very nice.
Mogida. Oh, we have to tell Litsa. And that piece is called The Elephant is the Room, which is great. Yeah?
Illusion of dreams.
The illusion of dreams.
Illusion of dreams, yes. Zoe? No. Steve?
Well, I don't have a piece of paper, Cherry, but I'm thinking angels.
Angels?
I just put genius of others.
Genius of others. Oh, nice.
Wow.
And at the back? No. Have you got one?
No, I don't.
No.
Peace.
Peace?
History.
History, yeah.
Living in unknown.
Living the unknown? Mm-hmm.
Energy.
Energy?
Masks.
Masks. Nice. Lovely, yeah.
A lot of things can be beside the, I believe it says, the surface of things.
Uh-huh. Great, great. Well done. Thank you. You can see that it really brought a huge range of approaches to the words themselves and also the theories around hidden in plain sight, whether it's justice, history, or something social, or the idea, the philosophical ideas of what's missing and what's at the edge of things. So thank you for doing that, because it really helps to see what people are bringing to the space as well. So I'd like to pass over to Veronica, who co-curated the show and also painted these wonderful works called This House, which explore the house as a self that has been broken into, and the idea of refuge being disturbed. And what I love about these pieces is how memory of events in a house become performative rather than just simply represented, and that, I would argue, makes it transformative. Why, I love where this house becomes this sort of digital swipe and goes off spinning into a cosmos, and it starts to really unhinge some of the things that are locked in this representation, which is really exciting, in a painterly sense and in a psychological sense. So I'll hand over to Veronica.
Great, well, thank you very much, Cherry, and thank you all for coming. What I want to do is really sort of contextualise this piece, this house, question mark, because actually in many respects it started off in this gallery. I was working on this series when I came up to see Cherry's conference and her performance of Famished, and the conference was called Legacies of Trauma, is that right? And it was a stunning event, particularly for myself, because in a way when you're making a series like this, it's very tentative, you're not quite sure what you're doing, and it's hard to put it in, to frame it and what's going on, but this conference really resonated with me and gave me confidence, and Cherry herself, coming to see the work, also gave me confidence in moving it forward. And that's a very important thing, as an artist you go into the studio, it's quite a solitary existence, and so you need that sort of feedback in there to keep the sort of momentum of the work going, and the focus. So I wanted to say a bit about that, because also the fact that the gallery being the Stephen Lawrence Gallery is crucial as well. It was, as I sat in the conference, I thought, wow, wouldn't it be a fantastic place to show what I'm working on? But it seemed a far off thing. But then meeting Litsa, seeing the work that she was doing, and the piece I saw was Tide, and suddenly there seemed to be a connection, and that was really important, and we thought, well, yes, let's kind of collaborate, and maybe we could sort of put things together, and we looked at other artists, and certainly John Smith was top of the list in terms of looking at the notion of architecture and trauma and how it embeds and is embedded within a sort of DNA, if you like. So John Smith came on board, and then Manda Eugenio had made this homage, and so around Grenfell, and obviously she'll talk more about that. And so things started coming together. When you're curating a show, it is a creative process, but it is a different process in respect to how you're working within the studio. But nevertheless, there are parallels. So gradually, we then brought on Shyla, and I'd seen her work. In fact, I'd shown with her many years ago. When she was talking about her childhood and the lack of time for herself and to do homework, because she spent the time cleaning out the ice cream van, which was her father's business, and doing all the things to support, like so many immigrant families do. They just, have to pull together to make the business, to work and to make a living. And so in a way, there we are, ice cream van, we all think, great, but hidden in plain sight is a lost childhood. And I thought, wow, that brings in another angle, so it sort of has another architectural significance. And if you like, the spooning and the cornets reference, the cornets and screwballs go Vegas rather, it's almost like a cityscape, but it kind of, the sparkly again hides something quite painful in many respects. And the spooning pieces we thought of as almost, they have an architectural quality to the plinths and the sort of way that they're made precious, something that we discard most of the time. And plastic, as we all know, is a terrible thing of waste. So they kind of began to enlarge the concept of what was hidden in plain sight. And of course, Litsa came out with the title actually, and sight, S-I-T-E, was the sort of, if you like, the rock, excuse the pun, for understanding where we were going to go with this exhibition, how the pieces were going to have a dialogue with each other, because that was also really important. It's important how the viewer encounters the exhibition. And so we thought that all out, but of course you can think it all out, but when you actually get in the space and you're installing it, and then other decisions are made, it's exciting, it's demanding, it's challenging. But what I really want to do at this moment is to thank all the artists. And I want to thank David, who's the director, who's here, for his support and help. Because together, with Cherry, writing the fantastic piece that she has for the brochure, it's something, for me, very special has come together. And it's a wonderful way to contextualise this piece that I worked on all that while back. So, thank you.
Thanks, Veronica. That was really interesting, the element not only of painting practice that are hidden, like doubt, like lacking confidence, but also those elements of curating that are hidden. And I came in the other day to see the show, and it just seems so meticulous. And it's only when things aren't working that that work behind it comes through, and it just looked so effortless. And I know it wasn't at all, but down to the details of that. The dark room, the light room, the correspondences between the builder's sand, the sand that you play in, and then Shyla's, ice creams and the spoons. It was just, there was all these beautiful parallels that you don't see when you see the work in isolation, and that's also why we curate group shows and we get so much from them. I want to introduce Mandy Eugeniu now, who's a transdisciplinary artist, and her video homage to Jack Smith's The Black Tower was built on images of Grenfell Tower taken by the general public. And I thought that was a really, really interesting way to talk about memorial and who owns it and intimacy and the public and the private. And she has a fantastic essay on her website which looks at the ethics of capturing a traumatic image and how these images compel and capture us, which of course we're all living through at the moment because of the war in Ukraine. But I was particularly interested in this idea of counter-memorial aesthetics, having discussed the idea of memorials with famished, and the government has placed all these bronze statues everywhere, but I just felt like they're almost putting a lid on trauma and not letting people talk about it. I mean, the idea of a bronze statue to Captain Tom Moore to mark the deaths in COVID is just another way of shutting it down. So I'd like to invite Mandy to talk about her experience of coming to the show and the work she's showing.
Thank you. Now that's an interesting point, and about the counter-memorial aesthetics, because the monument, you know, you can think about Grenfell in various ways in terms of the monument, and you know, a memorial monument kind of absorbs memory and then doesn't kind of allow you to expand the memory. So that's really what I was thinking about. Was I really don't want to do something that would just sit on a file on my computer, or would believe for us, if you know what I mean. So that, you know, we didn't have to. So I just talk a little bit about how it came about. When Grenfell Tower was on fire, and we all watched it, and it was just, you know, I mean, unspeakable, completely unbelievable. What struck me was, you know, a sense of rage and shock. Not just, you know, of course, for what people were going through, but what struck me was the sense of, you know, this sense of disappearance that I was watching on screen. So a little bit like 9/11, where immediately you're watching the trauma and you're watching the image of it, and it just collapses. So what we kind of, I feel, what we were presented with was very much a filmic event. We've watched it before, we watch it on TV, you know, it's something we've watched over and over again, and we know it. What that did for me, was that it derealised, you know, the complexity of Grenfell Tower. Not just the fire, but just the whole trauma of whatever these people went through, are going through. So because it made it a filmic event, I wanted to make a film, you know, and I kind of knew John Smith's work. I haven't been an artist for very long, but Litter actually introduced me to John Smith, and I'd watched it a couple of years before, and it just occurred to me, the Black Tower, you know, because I passed by there on the A40, it was there, hidden in plain sight, right? It was exposed as a black shell, very, very traumatic. So I wasn't quite ready to go and take photos, and you know, I had this idea, and I went to see John Smith, and he was very supportive. And I wasn't quite ready to go and take photos and make my film, you know, it wasn't quite right. So I had this idea that, plus they were covering it, and I didn't want to start the project without starting the project, you know. I wanted to just see what I was going to do, and then. So they were covering it up, and I thought, okay, I have to think about this differently. So I put an open call I made sure that the open call had strict rules, you know, no images of the fire, etc., etc. It's all on my website. And I got quite a few back, and I found that really moving, that people wanted to share that. You know, they wanted to actually submit these images. I got 16 images from one person. So that's how I made the film. I made the film by crowdsourcing images of the blackened tower. Sorry. And for me, what was really significant was this idea of aftermath photography, because I think that's very significant for counter memory, in that you're not focusing on the, you know, the horror of it. Obviously, I mean, I'm trying to say something about spectacularity, right? So I'm not going to focus on the fire. So there's something about this temporality of the afterwardness of it, and also the idea of making a homage to John Smith. That struck me as very significant because, you know, obviously John Smith has made this amazing film, and yeah, you're going to do a remake, but what you include in the remake is just as important as what you keep out. And you know, you're always playing with this idea of the real and the representation, right? So obviously his was the original and mine was the copy, you know. But that was very significant, not just because I was playing around with that idea, but significantly because what we were watching, as I said earlier, what we were watching with Groundfall was what was happening. The image was taking over the actual event. And I wanted to do something with all these emotions, and which was very, very difficult to live with that for 18 months. But I had to, you know, I had two massive super egos staring at me, you know, at John Smith and, you know, what was going on with Groundfall. So that's why I wanted to make specifically a film for that, because I wanted to, you know, get some of the real back, if you know what I mean. So that's a bit, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really powerful, that idea of collapsing, where that moment where trauma and image collapse, and then specularity and spectacularity. You know, we're so seduced by the spectacular, and then we're also then carrying this aftermath. And I think that's really interesting that you gave it over to other people and then pulled it together to try and dissect and understand some of that. And you know, I think, just to come back for a minute to that idea of, you know, how the phone steals our attention and steals our moments of contemplation quite often, and just that idea of, you know, this is one of the closest wars that we have in our pocket. We've got so much that isn't censored and isn't, you know, framed or edited, just coming through all the time. And then how do we react? How do we feel guilty when we don't look enough? And then we, you know, it's all this sort of questions of discipline, of looking and absorbing and protecting yourself and being open. And I think, you know, that's also what art involves. How open are you going to be? How personal? How vulnerable are you going to be? And I think there's, you know, quite a lot of different levels of vulnerability in the show, and that makes it also very. You can engage at many different levels, which works well. I wonder, just Veronica, if you something you'd like to respond to Mandy before I open it up to questions or responses.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying about vulnerability is, you know, you make the work. I mean, this series obviously comes from a very sort of personalised, painful space, if you like. It's around an historic crime. That's where it all started, a violation. And in a way, the house is a sort of icon of that, how actually living with trauma, how you process trauma, but it's also a celebration of survival. you know. So it's that self walked away, you know, they survived. And I think that's really important. And then, of course, you make the work, and then it's out there, it has its own readings. And that kind of opens up my own sense of the work too. When Cherry talked to me about the work, and she said, well, you know, the house being a self, how does that self, you know, mutate or change or shift? You know, that's all the process that we go through when we're trying to get through trauma or you know, live with trauma. You know, that's sort of really what these pieces are about. But they're also, as I say, celebratory, and they're about the chaos. You know, that the house also represents a chaos of you know, how we cope, or childhood, or it can offer so much in so many ways, and it will have meanings, a vast array of meanings for all the different things that people bring to the work. So it's kind of out there now, has its own life, which I think is very important to sort of recognise with any art piece, and to have it shown in this context also again shifts the meaning. You know, with Blight Next Door, I mean, that's such a powerful film, and you know, and I'm very sorry that John can't be here, because I'd love to have, you know, heard more about what he'd say about that. But that film and the soundtrack, the way it montages, it's actually has quite painterly resonance, which I said earlier to you, Mandy, about your piece, the colour, the way you're using colour, it really kind of connected. And so there are these connections that are very visible. And then, of course, we are moving Litz's piece with the drawing and the way that, you know, things are rubbed out, or that people are moving and the dust of the charcoal moves with them. You know, it's sort of the materiality of what we have. It's kind of externalizes so much, which is an internalized scape. And then we can share that. We can have a sense of, you know, we're not alone with it. And that's actually really important when we come to something like trauma, and how art can be there as objects, as transmitters, so that we can engage with each other and share, you know, those really painful or other types of memories, celebration. That's an important point of not being alone. And of course, with lockdown, I think that's even more important than ever.
Thank you. I just wanted to say something that occurred to me, more seeing Shyla's work particularly. We were hoping she would come to the panel, but maybe she's on her way. And that idea of it being an anti-assimilationist triumph, this, you know, yeah, we might be selling these ice cream cones, but they're, you know, covered in glitter and colour, and they're, you know, we have the aspirational dream, to the American dream or the British dream, whatever it is, the capitalist dream. And then these spoons that are always thrown away after use, and that just made me think of, you know, the migrant experience, you know, when you're, you know, not useful anymore, you're sent back. And if you look at Windrush, what happened, I thought those meanings were the first to come to me, but actually when I see this piece in situ, I'm thinking very much about, you know, the grid, the you know, American abstract color grids, that, you know, where the peak of modernism and the peak of, you know, this sort of white Western way of making art. And again, it seems like Shyla's kind of quite slyly cutting into that with these plastic spoons, and doing her own variation on that very, you know, kind of utilitarian minimalism. And maybe I'm putting words in her mouth, but that's also what we're here to do, to see how the pieces play off each other. I'd like to open it up to any responses or questions for Mandy or Veronica. And yeah, you've got one.
I'm just going to stand up so I can see you. Cherry, what you said about the guilt sometimes it becomes much less about sharing and much more divisive, I think. So I was thinking about your experience, Mandy, and like working with Grenfell, which is so complex and there are so many people's trauma involved. So I just wanted to ask you a bit about how you sort of navigated that, because I think it's just, yeah, so difficult.
It was difficult, and I think I was quite clear from the beginning that I wasn't doing a memorial that involved, you know, testimonial art. It wasn't that kind of memorial at all, and I knew that. However, you know, some things did come along as I was doing the project, because obviously I had to put out an open call, right? And that open call travelled into, obviously, I mean, it's social media, it travelled into websites where it shouldn't have, and I took it down, you know, it upset me. And I took it, you know, and obviously you have a backlash from people that claim it as their trauma, right? But I didn't care about that. I cared about the fact that I didn't want any, I didn't want the people to be hurt, you know, the people that I was trying to sort of make a project relating to that. So what I did is that I took it completely down, the open call from social media, and I started walking around and handing it out and talking to people as much as I could, and also contacting people one-on-one. And in the beginning I contacted as many organisations as I could. Whoever answered, I went to see them. You know, I tried to do that, and that was difficult. That was a learning process. It really was. It wasn't something that I knew from the beginning. And I think that was a good call. It was a good call to take it off social media completely, you know, and make myself available from the beginning. But yeah, it was hard. It was hard to, and I can't say that it's something I've processed now. I mean, because that's the last thing that I would ever, you know, right? That's the last thing that I would ever want the project to do. In fact, the opposite. But, you know, it was very fresh, and there was a lot going on at the time. You know, there was Andrew O'Hagan's publication, it upset many people, and obviously I'm seen as an outsider. So there was all of that to navigate, and I think making contact with some people, some of the survivors, meeting up with them, that helped. That helped a bit. But I had to remember that, you know, this is art, and I'm not making a project that is about testimonial art. You know, that's for the survivors. That's not, you know, a counter memorial it's different in that you're thinking about, you know, with counter memory, the way that I see it anyway, I'm sure other people have different definitions, but with the counter memorial, the way that I saw it was, you know, it's like you're bringing together overlapping tensions, and if something comes together, you know, like the breach of your paintings, you know, if something can sear through that and have, you know, there's a moment of flash, then that's good. You know, that's worked, if you know what I mean. So that's what I was thinking about it, and something what you were saying was, you know, what I was trying to do was trying to encourage, you know, people to have more of an ethical presence, because what happens when a trauma, a collective trauma, becomes spectacular is that it becomes hyper visible, and therefore it hides in plain sight. So what I was trying to do was just to encourage, you know, even somebody who didn't know anything about Grenfell to watch the film and have a more ethical presence with what happened, and perhaps not even answer anything, just raise some questions. So if I could do that, then I'd be happy that I did something okay. You know, as opposed to posit the film as a memorial. You know, it's not necessarily an old school memorial in that way. So I don't know if that answers.
I love the term ethical presence because I think that is a responsibility of us all, and in a way it creates a culture in which healing can begin, because I think as you say, this social media space, because it's unregulated and anonymous, there is no personal responsibility that's, I mean, obviously, if you don't have integrity, what do you have? And that's, what I think social media has shown us, that here we've got these huge companies making huge profits out of people's polarization, and that's produced a very unhealthy space, and where trauma is made visible in it, it's very damaging. And I think this sense of ethical presence is a very important one, because we all have a responsibility to that.
I think that's the essence of this exhibition, in a way, that we've been taken up control of our lives. It's just been taken over. That saying, events have taken over. Like that, John Smith's film was a road building exercise, wasn't it? M11. They were called compulsory purchase orders. They literally compulsory took over your property. There was no debate about it. It was like a speed. It took over, this essence of urgency. And I started thinking about this word regeneration, whether that's actually, if you looked at it in the word revolution, is it seen as a revolution to regenerate and change and move forward? It's for the common good, this sort of pushing forward all the time, really. And that is very nerve-wracking, all that, living in that culture. You have to dissect it all the time, don't you? Question it. Do we need that? Why are they doing this? And it becomes hard world to live in, actually, to stop questioning all this all the time, doesn't it? Without becoming highly political, And it's so thought-provoking, this exhibition. It really is.
Good. I mean, I think you're right in the sense of it is nerve-wracking. Capitalism hasn't worked, because here we are discussing, different aspects of it and how it impacts on, our individual mental health. There are all these decisions made, and in a way that's what the exhibition is trying to engage with. It's trying to think about, well, how do we position ourselves within that? How can we make change? Because we can make change.
Also, like Litz's We Are Moving, there's this very powerful aesthetic of, she's basically aestheticized people moving, right? And I think that really resonates with what you were saying, was the language that we use, and I mean, even the word gentrification sounds wonderful.
Why are we moving? Why are we moving? Stop, why are we moving? It's very questionable, this urgency. Regeneration is a really complex word, isn't it? Regeneration. Whose regeneration
is it? Yes, that's
is
a very
it?
good
Whose
question.
aesthetics are they regenerating into? Going back to Grenfell, the papers picked up on the fact that people were upset by that memoriam. They were closing her curtains. One woman got totally stressed by it, and she couldn't open her curtain windows for ages, could she? It caused more problems, that Black Tower, in a way. It was inappropriate to do it. So who made that decision to do that? It's difficult, isn't it? It's out of our hands in the world, isn't it? It seems to be out of our control until we look at it again,
I think you're right. We do have to challenge very basic things like words like growth, you know, we're quite obsessed with, you know, we need the growth and we need this growth and it's GDP, you know, but what does that mean? We have to always question that.
I think we have to challenge more. We have to ask more questions. Especially in this world of technology, where everybody seems to know what they're doing in the technology front, and the people using technology, what happened? You know, yes, it's become a more challenging world, isn't it? And this exhibition really brings that to the fore. Thank you.
Thank you. But I think also how we're addressed is important. So, for example, with Grenfell, we are addressed as witnesses. We are addressed as spectators, viewers, but also consumers and witnesses. And that is enough to drive you nuts. You know. So it's.
And where do you change in that? You know, when does the witnesser become the challenger, and the challenger becomes the activist, and you know, yeah.
Don't be shy.
Just to go back to Ukraine for a minute and the question of ethical presence and consuming those images, witnessing, you know, and I just felt so devastated, and I came into work here the other day and came through the atrium at the beginning of this building, and some of the design students had made this poster, the old love poster from the 70s with the, you know, and in bright yellow and bright turquoise. And I just felt so, this sort of sense of relief, this sense of communality, this sense that someone in this department had said, let's just make and in fact there are about 5 big posters which you can see in the next window. One's a sort of, you know, cartoon of Putin with, you know, toys in the pram kind of thing, and another one's an egg, a Russian egg with blood coming down it, and it was just those responses then made me think about that thing about being overwhelmed, and how do you build up your ethical response? What is that? Because we have to learn that as well, because we're learning how to manage our addiction to our phones and those images, and how do you learn? I mean, I found Toni Morrison's book, A Mouthful of Blood, incredibly helpful to talk about this thing about the moral imagination, and to have her grace and magnitude over the years. When she wanted to write about slavery, she wanted to write about beloved, and people said, oh, not that old thing again. She said, but it hasn't really been done yet. You know, we have to do it. We have to look at it. And her fighting for those spaces, and just having this incredible gravitas and worldview that, you know, you could apply to many things in your current life, and I certainly felt that with Famished. I felt like I really am not emotionally strong enough to look at the trauma of the Irish famine and British colonialism. No, I don't really want to do it. And then this was 6 or 7 years ago, and then I saw a poster in the underground of a painting of Queen Victoria. It was an exhibition for her life, and someone had graffitied across her forehead the words Irish famine. And suddenly I looked around and somebody else feels this, somebody else cares. What was Queen Victoria's response? I have no idea, but I'm going to find out. And that thing of finding someone, you know, even that, you know, Russian producer on the TV who risked, you know, 15 years in prison, putting up that sign. I mean, everybody felt like, I hope I would be the one. I hope I could do it. Would I be able to do it? I don't know, you know. It's those moments where you move from being a bystander to an activist, or to making art, to crafting those emotions and experiences into something that will help heal, will help discern what is an ethical presence. Even if it's every day for an hour, I will do nothing until this war is over. I will not look at my phone, but I will have these, you know, this stillness, or, you know, make a commitment to something that Mark set out from the other things you're always consuming. I don't know if that provokes anybody to respond.
It's also about, confidence in feeling that you can say something, you can do something, or something. There is a community that you can either create or be part of, or that you can create languages or speak the same language, but feeling that sense of connection that we need to continue to do that.
I think to me one of the most shocking things about everything that's been happening in these last 3 weeks, the war actually started the day we started installing this exhibition. So it was like a parallel existence, and obviously feeling it. But the thing that I think is that there's this other parallel world in terms of what Russian propaganda has constructed. And, we're not devoid, of course, in the West to constructing our own propaganda. But I think this sort of raises some very important questions about the sort of cultures we construct, because it also pertains to the values that we hold. And that something can be so oppositional is quite shocking when, we all know that the first casualty of war is truth. But I think also what's come up is what those values are, because, not so long ago refugees were being shot at on the Polish-Hungarian border, and now they're not. Why? Is it to do with the colour of the skin? The religion? We have to look at those wider ways that we understand value of humanity. What is a humanitarian crisis? Does it depend on identities, or does it depend on actual situation? And I think this, this whole constructed narrative that is in our phones, we constantly have to ask questions of and challenge the sources. Well, where did that come from? Who's saying it, and why are they saying it? And I think if we just look at the drownings that happened in the Channel not so long ago, why aren't they as important as? Of course, what's happening in Ukraine is shocking to the core, and in no way do I want to negate that. But everything is as shocking as well. So what happens with these two different, or these sets of visibilities that we are constantly aware of on our phone?
Yeah. It made me kind of stop in my tracks when the Observer called it a murderous war. I mean, isn't every war murderous? But it's more murderous than the war in Iraq. Why is that?
And the war in Yemen, which of course the USA and the UK are supporting Saudi Arabia, and who do we go cap in hand for energy? They are political questions, and everybody will have different views on that. But I think as artists, as creators, we have to understand how narratives are constructed, and constantly challenge that and unpick it. And so we, if we talk about, what is where is the Irish famine in our history? Where is slavery in our history? They have to be visible. And that's, I think, it then makes us understand how we engage with and absorb and are consumers of, but also how we can be activists in response to that. Like Jo Spence, she was a culture sniper. She had a fantastic term. I think it was a culture sniper.
That's great. Yeah. And we've time for maybe one more question, or response, or feedback to the show, or anything that's you liked or didn't quite get, you'd like to hear more on. Please ask us. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to follow on from what Molly said about visibility. Whose death becomes visible in the eyes of the world?
Yeah.
You have the US president calling Putin a war criminal, yet he completely ignored the findings of, this was just a few weeks ago, how Syrians were being bombed and their deaths were totally invisible because they were covered up. It took some military analyst, a whistleblower, to blow the lid off all these deaths.
Tens of hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq that, you know, Tony Blair was never punished for being a war criminal, and it just goes on. Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
I think this is why exhibitions like this are important, or just art in general is important, because it is about borders, and borders get constructed not only sort of materially, physically, but you know, vision is constructed, right? Is a construct, can be a construct. So I think it is important to be able to at least, sounds crazy, but see the, you know, see the that regime of visibility, if you know what I mean. I mean, so I guess it is important to talk about it, to find ways to talk about it, and think about it, and make work, and connect. I think that it's very, very important.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when we, as I say, Litsa was the one who came up with the title Hidden in Plain Sight. I mean, you know, then various people have responded, like my Afro-American sister-in-law says it's very much pertinent to the Afro-American experience because Black history is made invisible. But, you know, it's so it has its cultural significance in all sorts of different contexts. And I think it's really important that, you know, as we walk away and we take on what's perhaps hidden in plain sight for ourselves, that perhaps there are things that we don't want to admit to ourselves about our own past or our own sense of, you know, what we've gone through in our lives. You know, that it has a personalised hidden in plain sight too, as well as a more global sense of what's hidden in plain sight. So I you know, myself and Litsa hope you go away with a sense of the exhibition that stays with you, and perhaps you know, it gives a sense of reflection in a wider context.
Okay. Thank you so much to Mandy. Please join us in the next room for a little glass of wine.
Yeah, I'm going to set it up.
I'm going to set up a cooler wine.
Yes. Thank you very much, everyone.